I was only trying to help. Aisha tried to explain, her voice trembling. I found her in the bush. She was in pain. I didn't know what to do, but the villagers didn't listen. The more Aisha tried to explain, the angrier they got. The story changed and grew with every telling. Some said she had used the woman for a money ritual just to renew her uncle's wealth. Once upon a time, in a small village surrounded by lush green fields and a sparkling river, there lived a young girl named Aisha. She was a very beautiful and clever girl. Her uncle Malam was the wealthiest farmer in the village, loved by everyone for his kind heart. When Malam passed away, Aisha, who was his niece, inherited all his wealth and his big farm. Aisha's parents had died when she was very little, so she was all alone in her big house with its high walls and grand wooden doors. But she was not lonely. She had the whole village as her family. Malam was a man who believed in sharing his blessings. He would give away half of his farm's produce to people who had less. After Malam passed away, Aisha continued doing the same. She was just like her uncle, kind and generous. Every time the farm had a harvest, she made sure the villagers got their share, especially the old men and women who couldn't work anymore. Aisha wasn't just kind by giving away food and her farm produce, she was also kind in small ways like smiling, listening to others, and helping out. Everyone in the village loved Aisha because she was different from other wealthy people. She was humble and down to earth. She didn't act like she was better than anyone else. Instead, she would spend her free time with other girls of the village chatting and playing like she was one of them. The villagers loved her, not just because she gave them things, but because she was one of them at heart. People would often say, "Look at Aisha. She's just like her uncle Malam, so kind and giving," and Aisha would just smile and continue doing her good work. She believed that if you have the means to help, you should. Little did she know that her grandmother, who lived in a small clay hut at the edge of the village, had some wise words of caution for her words of caution for her words that would soon change the way she saw the world. One sunny day, Aisha went to visit her grandmother. Her grandmother was old and wise, with many stories and lessons from her long life. As they sat under a big tree outside her hut, her grandmother looked at Aisha with a serious look in her eyes. "Aisha," her grandmother said, "you are just like your uncle, always ready to help. But I must tell you something important." Aisha listened carefully as her grandmother continued. Aisha listened carefully as her grandmother continued. "It's good to be kind, but you must be careful. Not everyone who smiles at you is your friend." Her grandmother then told her an old saying: "People love heroes, but what they love more than heroes is seeing the hero fall." Aisha looked puzzled, so her grandmother explained, "I told the same thing to your Uncle Malam. Being too kind can sometimes bring trouble. Some people might take advantage of your kindness or even become jealous, Aisha thought about this for a moment, but she couldn't imagine anyone in her village being unkind to her. "I understand, Grandma," Aisha replied, "but I believe that if I can help, I should. That's what makes our village strong. We help each other." Her grandmother nodded, knowing Aisha was just as stubborn as her uncle. "Just remember, not all help is good help. Sometimes the best help is teaching others to stand on their own." Aisha hugged her grandmother, promising to be careful, but deep down she still believed in her uncle's way to help wherever and whenever she could. Little did Aisha know her grandmother's words would soon echo in her life in a way she never expected. One evening, as Aisha was walking home through a quiet path lined with tall trees and chirping birds, she heard a cry for help coming from the bush. Her heart raced as she followed the sound and found a woman lying on the ground in pain. The woman was pregnant and it looked like her baby was coming soon. Without a second thought, Aisha rushed to help. She remembered watching the village midwives and tried to do what they did, but things were not going well. The woman was losing a lot of blood, and Aisha didn't know how to stop it. She was scared, but kept trying to help, hoping she could save both the mother and her baby. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the village, the woman's cries grew weaker, so Aisha decided to take her to the village. As Aisha tried to help the woman to the midwife's house, just as they stepped into the village in front of everybody in the village square, the woman suddenly collapsed. Aisha shouted for help, but by the time others came, the woman was not moving. Aisha felt her heart sink as the woman stopped moving. She was covered in blood, her hands shaking. She didn't know what to do. She had tried to help, but now the woman lay cold on the ground, looking like she was dead. Aisha was in shock. She had wanted to be a hero to save the day like her uncle always did, but now she stood alone in the middle of the village with her hands covered in blood and the pregnant woman not moving. The villagers in shock and fear started whispering. "She's dead," someone said. "Aisha killed her." One person whispered that Aisha had hurt the woman. Another said she was a witch. The word spread like wildfire. "Aisha is a witch," they said. "She brought bad luck upon the woman." Aisha couldn't believe her ears. These were the same people she had grown up with, helped and cared for. How could they think so ill of her? The villagers who had been benefactors from Aisha's uncle's farm now looked at her like she was a stranger. All of a sudden, the once generous Aisha had become dangerous in their faces. "I was only trying to help," Aisha tried to explain, her voice trembling. "I found her in the bush. She was in pain. I didn't know what to do." But the villagers didn't listen. The more Aisha tried to explain, the angrier they got. The story changed and grew with every telling. Some said she had used the woman for a money ritual just to renew her uncle's wealth. Others said she was cursed since no woman had died in childbirth in the village since Aisha's own birth. Aisha stood in the middle of the crowd, feeling alone and scared. She had always seen the best in her village, but now she saw something else: fear and suspicion. It was like a dark cloud had covered the sun, and the warmth she had always felt in her village was gone. She remembered her grandmother's warning and wished she had listened. As the accusations grew, the villagers decided to take Aisha to the king for judgment. Aisha walked with her head down, her heart heavy with sadness and disbelief. The kind girl who had always been a hero in the village was now being treated like a villain. This was a betrayal she never saw coming. The angry villagers dragged Aisha to the king's palace. The king, an old man with a kind face, had known Aisha since she was a child. He had seen her grow up into a kind and generous young woman. But now, as the villagers told their stories, his face grew serious. His face grew serious. The villagers spoke loudly, their words filled with fear and anger. "She killed the woman," one said. "She's a witch," another added. The king listened, his eyes moving from the villagers to Aisha. She stood there, her clothes still stained with blood, looking small and scared. The king knew Aisha's heart and knew she was good and kind, but the villagers were scared, and their fear was turning into anger. The king thought about what was best for the village. He had to keep peace, even if it meant making a hard choice. "Aisha," the king said, his voice heavy, You are accused of a great crime. The tradition of our land says that anyone who takes a life must face punishment. He or she will be prosecuted. Aisha's heart sank. She looked into the king's eyes, hoping he would see the truth. But the king looked away. I didn't do it, Aisha whispered, but her voice was lost in the shouts of the crowd. She felt alone, surrounded by the angry faces of people she once called friends and family. She remembered her grandmother's words, people love heroes, but what they love more than heroes is seeing the hero fall. It was all happening just as her grandmother had warned. Her world was crashing down, and there was nothing she could do. She never understood those words until now. The same people she had helped were now calling for her punishment. The king ordered Aisha to be held until her fate could be decided. She was led away, her head down, her heart broken. The kindness she had always believed in had turned against her. In the eyes of her village, she was no longer a hero, but a villain. This was a lesson Aisha would never forget. She sat in the small dark cell at the back of the palace, hearing the muffled cries and whispers of the villagers outside. But just as all hope seemed lost, an unexpected voice came to her rescue. As the villagers were about to take Aisha away, the midwife hurried into the palace out of breath. "Stop," she cried. "The woman is alive. She just fainted because she lost a lot of blood." A hush fell over the crowd. The midwife explained that the woman had given birth to a healthy baby and was resting in her house. After the truth came out, the villagers looked at each other, shame written on their faces. They had been so quick to accuse Aisha, the same girl who had always been there for them. One by one, they apologized for their hasty judgments and harsh words. "We were wrong," they said. "Please forgive us." Aisha listened quietly, her eyes reflecting a mix of forgiveness and deep thought, but she never said a word. That day she just walked away from the crowd, her steps slow but steady. Then one evening, the villagers gathered around Aisha as they used to, but this time it was different. Aisha stood before them, a calm and wise look on her face. "I forgive you all," she began, her voice gentle yet firm. "But we must learn from this. Being kind is good, but we must also be wise." Aisha spoke about the importance of balance in helping others. Kindness is like a river that should flow but with caution. She said, "We should help but also think about how and when we help. It's not just about giving what we can, it's also about understanding what's truly needed." That day, if I had run to the village to call the midwives instead of trying to help all by myself, the situation might have been different. The villagers listened, their faces showing understanding and respect. Aisha talked about setting limits to kindness. "We can't pour from an empty cup," she explained. "As we care for others, we must care for others. We must care for ourselves too, in the best way possible." Aisha's experience had changed her, but it didn't harden her heart. Instead, she became more thoughtful in her generosity. She still helped the villagers, but now she did it in ways that were more careful and considered. She involved others in her decisions, encouraging them to be part of the solution. Her approach to kindness became a lesson for the entire village. People started to think more about how they helped each other. They learned that kindness wasn't just about giving things away. It was about understanding, listening, and being there for each other in the right way. And as for Aisha, her grandmother's words, "People love heroes, but what they love more than heroes is seeing the hero fall," had guided her to a deeper understanding of kindness, one that not only gives but also builds and strengthens. She now realized that she could be kind and wise at the same time, making her world a better place in her own unique way. The story of Aisha teaches us a valuable lesson about the balance between kindness and wisdom. While kindness is a noble quality, it is essential to approach helping others with thoughtfulness and caution. Acting impulsively, even with good intentions, can sometimes lead to misunderstandings or unintended consequences. Aisha's experience reminds us that true kindness involves understanding the situation, making wise decisions, and knowing when to involve others for better solutions. Additionally, the story highlights the danger of judging others hastily or allowing fear and suspicion to cloud our judgment. Trust and unity within a community can only thrive when people are willing to listen, support, and think carefully before accusing others. Finally, Aisha's resilience and her ability to forgive and grow from her experiences demonstrate the importance of inner strength and learning from challenges. Her journey reminds us that being both kind and wise can lead to stronger, more meaningful connections with others. Thank you for watching my channel. If you enjoyed this story and its valuable lesson, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring and insightful content. See you in the next video. That same night, Halima cast a spell on her son Jamal while he was asleep. Once upon a time, in a small village called Tafia, there lived a beautiful and kind lady named Nafisa. Nafisa was so beautiful that her beauty and grace caught the eyes of many men. Many men came for her hand in marriage, but she bluntly refused their advances. Her only reason for rejecting men who came for her hand in marriage was simply because she never wanted to make a mistake and end up marrying the wrong man. She was scared of being mistreated by any man she could call her husband. So for that reason, she rejected many men who didn't seem worthy to her. Nafisa was almost 27 without a husband or child. Her mother became impatient with her and she began to persuade her to accept any of the suitors and get married. Nafisa ignored her mother's advice, saying that she had not found the man she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. All her mates and friends in Tafia village were married with kids, but Nafisa was still single. This made the villagers make fun of her each time she passed by the village square. The villagers called her different names, while some called her an evil spirit. Despite all the side talk and pressure from people, Nafisa never listened or cared, and she never failed to carry herself with grace. One day, as Nafisa was going to the market and passing along the bushy path, she was bitten by a snake on her left foot. She fell down, writhing in pain and screaming for help, but no one could hear her. She kept screaming for help. Fortunately, a very handsome man named Jamal, who was passing by the road, saw Nafisa lying on the ground. He ran immediately to help her. When he got there, he asked Nafisa what happened, and she told him she had been bitten by a snake. Jamal took pity on Nafisa, carried her immediately, and took her to the village herbalist. The village herbalist treated Nafisa, but she fell asleep during the treatment. When she woke up, she found Jamal watching over her. She noticed the gentle concern in his eyes and the way he adjusted her blanket while she slept. After she regained her strength, she thanked Jamal for saving her life, and immediately she fell in love with Jamal, and Jamal also fell in love with her. It was love at first sight. Jamal loved Nafisa so much that he decided to marry her and make her his wife. He asked for Nafisa's hand in marriage, and Nafisa didn't hesitate to accept his marriage proposal. After their successful marriage, Nafisa was so happy to be married to Jamal. Nafisa moved into Jamal's house, and they began to live as husband and wife. They were living peacefully until one day when Jamal's mother Halima visited Jamal uninvited. Jamal's mother was known for her troublesome and arrogant lifestyle, and everyone tried their best to stay away from her trouble because she was known for her powers and love for black magic. She possessed strange magical powers which she received directly from the river goddess of Tafia village, making people fear her even more. When Nafisa saw her mother-in-law, when Nafisa saw her mother-in-law, she welcomed her warmly and served her some food. Her mother-in-law ate the food, pretending to be a good woman. After she ate the food, when her son Jamal got back home, she started complaining to Jamal about Nafisa and the food she had given her to eat. She told Jamal that the food Nafisa gave her was tasteless and had no meat, and that Nafisa had added water into her food. However, Jamal, knowing who his mother was, didn't take the complaint seriously. Halima gradually began to make Nafisa's matrimonial home unbearable for her. She kept nagging at the slightest mistake, always finding fault with Nafisa and making her life difficult. Nafisa, being a good and kind woman, kept trying her best to please and satisfy her mother-in-law despite her unkindness towards her. She went as far as washing all her clothes, putting 6 different varieties of meals for her every day to suit her taste. She would clean the house to her mother-in-law's satisfaction, wash all her dirty clothes, and take care of her needs. However, Halima was never satisfied. She always had something to complain about. Nafisa gradually became a maid in her own matrimonial home with no rest or moments of peace for her. Every morning, as soon as Jamal left home, Halima would keep sending Nafisa on different errands. Sometimes she would invent chores just to keep Nafisa busy and exhausted. Nafisa kept enduring despair just to make sure her home was at peace. But one day, Miriam opened up to her husband and told him about the sufferings his mother had put her through. Her husband Idris was very upset and unhappy. He tried to speak with his mother concerning the stress she put his wife through. He told his mother to let Mariam be and to stop treating her like that. Hajara became angry at Mariam for reporting her to her husband, her son. She swore to deal with Mariam. That same night Hajara cast a spell on her son, Idris, while he was asleep. The spell she cast on him was to make him unresponsive to her evil deeds. No matter how she treated his wife, he was never going to react or say anything about it. When Hajara knew that she had her son under her grip, she turned Mariam into a full-time housemaid, and Mariam kept suffering while her husband kept quiet over all the mistreatment from her mother. But Mariam never knew her husband was under a spell. Mariam continued enduring the torments from her mother-in-law, and this continued for months. One day, Mariam discovered she was pregnant with her first child. She was happy that she was going to become a mother very soon. She told her husband the good news, and she begged her husband never to let his mother Hajara know about it. From her mother-in-law continued, and Mariam discovered that she has begun to get weaker and weaker as the week passed. She decided to leave her matrimonial home, telling her husband that she could be traveling to her home and that she will stay there until she gives birth. During their discussion, they never knew that Hajara was standing behind a door, listening to their conversation, and then she came to realize that her daughter-in-law was pregnant. Hajara began to plot. How to stop her daughter-in-law from leaving was to leave Hajara sneaked into her room and added some substance into Mariam's food. After Mariam ate the food, she began to feel dizzy and wouldn't leave. She slept for hours, and by the time she woke up, it was already late at night. She noticed something was added to the food she had eaten. She became upset and confronted her mother-in-law. Hajara couldn't believe that Mariam could have the guts to confront her. Hajara swore to day with Mariam. Hajara used her strange powers to cast a second spell on her son. This time she touched a spell for her son to do whatsoever she told him to do. She started first by telling her son to stop taking care of his wife and also to stop giving her money for food. Her aim was to see Mariam starve to death. Mariam struggled to take care of herself and her unborn child single-handedly. She was able to survive by doing some manual jobs for people where they paid her some meager amount of money which she used to buy food for herself and also to buy some baby stuff for her unborn child. It surprised Hajara how Mariam was able to survive even without the help of her husband. Hajara thought maybe the spell she cast on her son was not enough to make Mariam suffer, so she decided to cast a spell on her pregnancy. The spell was to stop Mariam's pregnancy from reaching full term. After 6 months, it was almost time for Mariam to deliver. She was excited that her baby could arrive soon. She got everything ready. 10 and 11 months passed, and there were no signs of labor. Mariam began to weep, asking God to help her deliver. But the more she waited, the more everything seemed like it was in vain. Her mother-in-law began to mock her and call her names, telling her that this is what you get for challenging me. Her husband, who was under the influence of his mother's charm, didn't even care about his wife. Mariam was left to carry this challenge alone. Hajara, who was determined to see her daughter-in-law suffer, brought another woman for her son to marry. She sent Mariam away from her matrimonial home, even with her pregnancy. When Mariam got home, she narrated the whole event to her mother. Her mother was so emotional that her daughter had gone through all this in the hands of her mother-in-law. She welcomed her daughter and took care of Mariam. She was excited that her daughter made it out alive. Mariam kept struggling with her pregnancy. At the 18th month of her pregnancy, she fell sick. Her mother began to grow concerned for her daughter and her pregnancy. She took her to a herbalist, and after the herbalist examined her, he told Mariam's mother that her daughter's pregnancy was under a spell. With the spell on her, she could never give birth, as she might probably die with the pregnancy. Her mother was terrified and asked the herbalist what she could do to undo the spell. The herbalist told her to take her daughter to Aisha River and bathe her, as the spell cast on her daughter was from the Aisha goddess, and only bathing in the Aisha River could undo the spell. When Mariam regained consciousness, her mother took her to Aisha River and she bathed there. After 3 days, she began to get better and stronger. On the 4th day, she went into labor. After 6 hours of labor, she gave birth to a baby boy. She was very happy and overjoyed. Back at Mariam's matrimonial home, the woman Hajara had brought home for her son to marry turned out to be the daughter of a very powerful chief priest with great magical powers. When Hajara tried to mistreat Zara just the same way she did to Mariam, she refused and stood her ground against Hajara. Hajara never knew Zara had great powers which she had obtained earlier from her father before coming. Hajara tried to cast a spell on her, but the spell didn't work. Hajara decided to poison her food. One night, while she was sleeping, Hajara sneaked into her kitchen to add poison to her pot of soup. However, Zara was not asleep. She was only pretending. Zara saw Hajara adding the poison into her food. After Hajara left, Zara took the poisoned pot of soup and swapped it with Hajara's. The next morning, Hajara woke up, happily hoping to hear sad news soon. She went into her room and started eating from the pot of soup in her room, not knowing that the food she ate from was the one she had added poison to. After eating, she lied down in her room and couldn't wake up again. She died. Zara discovered that what she had added to her pot of soup was poison, and she was happy that finally the evil woman was dead. Right after Hajara's death, the spell she cast on her son cleared away from his eyes. He began to look for his wife Mariam, but only told him that she was sent back to him by his mother, narrated to him how her mother lied against Mariam and made her believe Mariam was a witch, which made her decide to follow her home and marry him. Mariam only asked for Idris's forgiveness, and then she left Idris's home, never to come back again. Idris went to ask for forgiveness from Mariam. When he got there, he discovered that Mariam had already given birth. He was overjoyed and happy. He knelt down and asked Mariam to forgive him, explaining that he didn't do it intentionally. He told her that his mother cast a spell on him. Mariam, being such a kind woman, forgave him and went back with their son to her matrimonial home. When Mariam got home, she discovered that her mother-in-law had died. She was filled with grief and wept bitterly, but finally Mariam and Idris, alongside their son, lived as one big happy family. This story teaches us several valuable lessons. First, it highlights the dangers of allowing negative influences, such as a controlling mother-in-law, to disrupt the peace and harmony of relationships. Open communication and setting boundaries are crucial to addressing such challenges. Second, it emphasizes the power of patience and endurance, as Nafisa later Mariam showed remarkable strength despite her hardships. However, it also underscores the importance of standing up against mistreatment and seeking help when needed. Third, the story demonstrates that evil intentions often backfire, as seen in Halima's downfall after her malicious actions. Forgiveness is another important lesson, as Nafisa chose to forgive her husband, understanding that he acted under his mother's spell. Lastly, the story reminds us of the enduring value of kindness and empathy, as Nafisa's compassion ultimately led to her happiness and reconciliation. Thank you for watching my channel. I hope this story inspires you to reflect on these lessons and apply them in your own life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more interesting and meaningful stories. See you in the next video. In a lively market where people wore colorful clothes and sold all sorts of things, there was one special store that everyone talked about. It was G's wig store. Jimmy was a charming man who always smiled, wearing his signature blue tunic that made him stand out, and his wigs were the talk of the town. The young girls and women in that town were enchanted by Jimmy's wigs. They would fight and argue just to buy one. I need to look my best, but I can't look my best without Jimmy's wigs, some of them would say to themselves. The competition to buy Jimmy's wigs grew fierce. Women saved all their money and even borrowed just to afford one. This wig will make me feel like a queen, they would say. The market, with its aroma of spices and roasted peanuts, was always buzzing with excitement around Jimmy's store. They would fight and argue just to be able to afford one of G's wigs, and this made Jimmy very, very excited. But do you know the intriguing thing about Jay's wigs? The wigs were cursed. People didn't know the wigs were cursed. They just saw how beautiful they were and would always fight and rush to buy them. Any woman who bought a wig from Jimmy's store always had one thing or another happening negatively in her life, but they never understood what was going on and never suspected that their problems were coming from Jimmy's wigs. A young woman named Maya, who had recently gotten married, was so excited because she had just discovered that she was pregnant. On breaking the news to her husband, on breaking the news to her husband asked her, "My dear wife, in celebration of our unborn child, what do you want me to buy for you?" Maya responded to her husband, "My husband, I want one of Jay's wigs. I've been dreaming of wearing one of G's wigs. Please, I wouldn't mind if you buy me a wig from Jimmy's store." The husband, beaming with pride, gave Maya money to buy Jimmy's wig just to congratulate themselves for having a child on the way. The next day, Maya visited Jimmy at his store. The sun reflected off the golden lettering on his shop sign as Maya entered. "Gee, I want to buy this wig. I've been dreaming about buying a wig from you. I mean, you are the talk of the town. Which woman wouldn't want to buy a wig from you? Please give me one of your wigs. How much is it?" "My husband already gave me money, and I want to buy it now." Jimmy said no problem, and he gave the wig to Maya. When Maya got home, she was so excited about finally purchasing a wig from Jimmy's store. At least when other women were talking in town about Jimmy's wigs, she would also be able to join the conversation. Immediately Maya wore the wig on her head. A few hours later, she had a miscarriage. She lost the pregnancy. They didn't know where the problem was coming from, and they never suspected that it was the wig Maya bought from Jimmy's store that caused the miscarriage. The next time Maya became pregnant again, anytime she put on that wig, there was always a miscarriage. Maya still didn't know what was going on, and this continued to happen in her marriage. Anytime Maya wore that wig, she always had one problem or another in her marriage. Another beautiful young lady called Nina recently got engaged to the love of her life. She was so excited and decided to celebrate her engagement and upcoming wedding by buying a wig from Jimmy's store. She said to herself, "I need to buy one wig from Jimmy's store because I must use Jimmy's wig for my wedding. I mean, I've told my hairstylist that I am coming with G's wig and I must wear it." Nina visited Jimmy's store and purchased a wig from Jimmy with the intention of using it as a wig for her wedding. On the very day of Nina's wedding, immediately she wore that wig she bought from Jimmy, her husband, to be the groom, canceled the wedding, turned everything upside down, and said he was no longer interested in marrying Nina. Everyone was confused. Nina herself was confused. She wondered what her offense was. How can my groom all of a sudden decide not to marry me again? What have I done? Nina did not know that it was the wig she bought from Jimmy's store that she wore on her head that caused the whole chaos on her wedding day. That was how Nina's wedding got cancelled, while the women wore the wigs they bought from Jimmy's store. Strange things started happening in their lives, and they never suspected for one day that it was the wig causing all these problems. A singer called Leela, who was known for her beautiful and melodious voice, lost her voice immediately she wore the wig. Obi, who was also a talented dancer, hurt his leg mysteriously. Their fortunes seemed to vanish, and they couldn't understand why. The market was filled with whispers and worries. In that same market, there lived a wise and smart girl called Zena. Zena's mother owned a store selling groceries in that market, which always smelled of fresh tomatoes and herbs. She was a very smart and observant girl, and she noticed the changes that some of the women who bought wigs from Jimmy's store always had. She saw how the women who wore the wigs seemed to lose their talents and luck in the market. She said to her mother, "Mama, have you seen what's happening to the women with Jay's wigs? Imagine that auntie that sells clothes down the road. The last time she has been complaining of bad luck in her business." And I noticed that it was immediately she bought a wig from Jimmy's store that all of this happened. Okay, what about Auntie Leela? Auntie Leela's business started falling apart, and her husband chased her out of her house. I also observed that it was immediately after she bought a wig from Jimmy's store. "I don't think Jesus' business is pure, Mama." Then her mother answered, "My daughter, I think you are right, but we have to be very careful because even I know something is not right with that Jimmy of a boy." Zena decided to investigate. She spoke to the women affected in the markets. Some of them said my business used to flourish, but ever since I started wearing that wig, it is no longer moving well. Then some of the girls in the market said I used to be a good singer, but now I can't. Another said I used to be the best dancer, but now I can't even walk properly. Coincidentally, Maya came to the market to buy foodstuff. Upon hearing Zina and the other people's conversation, she also said, "Ah, no wonder anytime I put on that wig, I'm always having a miscarriage." Zena listened carefully to how the women lamented, piecing together the puzzle. My dear viewers, I'm sure you are also wondering what exactly and how Jimmy started selling evil wigs. Well, Jimmy wasn't always a wig seller. He used to be a humble trader selling ordinary goods. One day, he met an old mysterious man named Baba Obi, who promised him great wealth if he followed his advice. Baba Obi, with his scarred hands and raspy voice, taught Jimmy how to make wigs using dark magic. The wigs would look beautiful but would bring bad luck to those who wore them, and in turn, Jay's business and wealth would begin to bloom. Jimmy, blinded by greed, agreed to the plan. Jimmy crafted his first cursed wig and sold it to a rich woman. Soon after, the woman fell ill, but Jay's business boomed. People didn't know the wigs were cursed. They just saw how beautiful they were. Now you know how Jimmy started this evil wig business. Let's go to how Zena was able to bring Jimmy down. Keep watching this video. Zena knew she had to act, but she needed a plan. She gathered her friends and shared her findings. "We need to catch Jimmy in the act. We must show everyone the truth," Zena said. Her friends agreed to help. Determined to stop the evil, one night, Zena and her friends followed Jimmy to his secret workshop. They hid behind the bush and watched how he chanted strange words, and this made the wigs glow with lights. Zena's heart raced. They had the proof they needed. The next morning, Zena and her friends confronted Jimmy in the market. "Jimmy, your wigs are cursed. You used dark magic to harm our people," Zena shouted. The crowd gathered, murmuring in shock. Jimmy tried to deny the accusations. "These are lies. My wigs are simply beautiful. Nothing more," he claimed. But Zena and her friends were prepared. They showed everyone a cursed wig they had taken from his workshop. The market fell silent as people looked at Jimmy in shock. "Is this true?" someone shouted. Jimmy's face turned red with anger, but he couldn't hide the truth. The people were angry and demanded answers. Just when everyone thought Jimmy would be caught, Jimmy tried to run away. But Zena had a clever idea. She grabbed one of his wigs and threw it at him. The wig glowed and wrapped around Jimmy, making him stumble and fall.